I'm Wyatt Cash at Scoop News Group, and we're here at the Age of Identity Public Sector Forum with George Freeman, Solutions Consultant for Fraud and Identity at LexisNexis. George, thank you for joining us today.
I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Let me start by asking you, how has the adoption of widespread remote work changed your authentication strategies?
It's an interesting story. Of course, we all went remote last year about this time, and remote work has moved up our organization's reliance on multi-factor authentication. That's one. Single sign-on build-out has continued, and that clearly is a strength right now. We're doing a lot of identity federation across corporate protected resources as well, mostly through Microsoft 365 migration, which they obviously had moved up on the priority list. We've also increased capacity for the VPN access. We ran into those typical challenges, and we also shifted to remote collaboration tools, mainly like Microsoft Teams and other tools like that.
Well, in light of the president's executive order on cybersecurity, we're getting a lot of focus on zero trust. How much would you say that zero trust is a mentality versus a set of technology goals?
It's, I would say it's both, and you really have to take into account what it's trying to do, but not necessarily follow it, very mechanically. And what I mean by that is, Google's Beyond Corp initiative, it took them 6 years to implement this. And what they're trying to do is get rid of any assumed or blind trust. The so-called internal protected networks are gone. BYOD devices, mobile devices have really pushed the boundaries to being very poorly defined. And so the idea is you just have to get very granular with your policies. It is robust, but you can use elements of it to build probably a more modern approach to that. And what I mean by that is instead of throwing tons of high friction at the user, you still are going to have problems with trusted users who might do something untrustworthy, and you won't be able to catch that. So all of this effort might be for naught. I mean, Ed Snowden's a great case in point. Here's a trusted guy doing all their security, and what does he do? He makes off with a ton of information. Now, elements of zero trust can be rolled into an adaptive digital identity workflow, is what we call it. And what that means is you focus more on effective risk assessment through both identity assurance, is okay, it's George's device, but is it really George, or are there indicators of risk? And then identity proofing flows if you need to onboard somebody to put out their PII and verify everything.
Well, to what extent do leaders need to get organizational buy-in before deploying zero trust technologies?
That's a great question. I think the first thing that you've got to do is assess where's the current identity weakness in the organization? Where do they live? Things like legacy username password accounts, are they still in use? Go find them, and that's an issue. Next, you want to quantify the potential damage impact to the organization. And what that means is if an identity were to get compromised, how far would it go? How much high in the organization would it go to basically have to remediate that damage? From there, it's a matter of applying elements of zero trust where it's most effective, such as, again, performing identity assurance risk assessment for every remote worker session, for instance. Knowing the digital history of a trusted worker is critical to maintaining the security of an organization's sensitive resources.
Next, what are your organization's priorities now in terms of establishing identity management procedures and updating those?
It's a great question. Right now, priorities are to maximize effective use of our remote collaborative tools, things like Microsoft Teams, Smartsheets, Salesforce implementation, while also providing robust identity security, including required Microsoft Authenticator, effective identity federation. We also have implemented internal controls to meet things like FedRAMP, internal infrastructure requirements going forward.
And then next, walk me through the other effects that might come from a more efficient means of identity and authentication management. And are there ripple effects beyond that?
You said the magic word there about efficiencies. Centralizing identity management for the organization is key. That improves security and efficiency. It also gives you visibility in real time to meet things like compliance when they go into continuous compliance requirements. There's fewer standalone or non-integrated logins for employees. That's got to be an objective. You want to phase out the use of passwords to do basic authentication. This will also help improve the cybersecurity identity management. The idea is if accounts can be controlled quickly during change events, for instance, an employee leaves the organization or maybe goes on extended leave, that's very quickly done across multiple platforms.
And lastly, George, a quick and simple final question. Will we ever get rid of passwords?
I love this question. Not per se. The one way to think about it is we will not rely on passwords going forward. We should not be in a mode where a simple username and password is still the authentication requirement of any system, really. Somewhere there's going to be a legacy system that will still require it, but what you want is a robust workflow featuring identity assurance. Again, it's George's device, but is it George? And then identity proofing, risk assessments, especially when you're onboarding either new employees, contractors, and such. That needs to be performed before anyone will ever get to a password prompt.
Well, George Freeman, thank you so much for spending a little time with us today and sharing some of your insights on these important topics.
Glad to be here. Appreciate it.